Well, good morning, Greatview friends. Thanks for joining us today. Again, perhaps a wintry, springy, kind of middle of March kind of weekend with some snow coming down. And here we are on this third Sunday of Lent in the Christian calendar. That's an old English word, Lent, that just means springtime. But it's also a time of spiritual preparation for Holy Week, or Easter. This great celebration, we might say, of the spring season, when all things are made new in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Lent is this period of 40 days because we often reflect on Jesus' time in the wilderness at the beginning of his ministry, that kind of hard preparation for the ministry that was to come to him. But the scriptures we read during this time of Lent are often focused on stories of Jesus' journey toward Jerusalem in those last weeks before his crucifixion. Jesus knew the time was coming, and he had important things to do and to say before he could actually say, "It is finished." So over these next weeks, I'm going to focus on three of the events that unfold as Jesus is walking to Jerusalem. His meeting with the woman at the well in Samaria, the healing of the man who was born blind, and the death and resurrection of his friend Lazarus, just days before Jesus' own death. In a world where everything is determined by natural forces, by scientific explanations, by sociological explanations, by psychological explanations, what do we do with a God who keeps showing up in a manner that we can't fully explain away? Jesus is walking, and he travels through Samaria, this region, a different group of people, different cultural heritage, different beliefs. It's kind of like if you want to get to Nova Scotia, but you have to drive through Quebec, okay? Jesus and his disciples stop at a gas station to rest and get some food on this journey through Samaria. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you've nothing to draw with. This well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did all his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will get thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, Yeah, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep drawing here day after day." Jesus told her, "Go, call your husband and come on back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you've just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you're a prophet. Now, our ancestors worship on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship in is Jerusalem." Now, do you see what she did right there? Jesus and this woman have been talking about wells, about water, about history, about eternal living water. And this woman is all kind of matter-of-fact about things. You don't have anything to draw water with. Yeah, really, if you had magic water, just give it to me. I'll go along with your joke, whatever. And then Jesus breaks in to her world with this word of knowledge about her life story. This is a truly amazing revelation. There's no way Jesus could have known about this. And she acknowledges that moment. She realizes, okay, this guy's a prophet. He's someone who speaks for God. But then she just goes back to talking about religious disputes and stuff that can be explained away by historians and sociologists, worshiping on this mountain, that mountain, whatever. But this is where the discussion finishes a few moments later. The woman said, I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. And when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus answered, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. She's thinking about what he said earlier about her situation. There's no way he could have known that. She wonders, could this be the Messiah? And Jesus says, yes, I am the one. And then she leaves and goes back to the village. So let me remind you of another skeptical conversation between some people and a prophet about water. This is Moses, the prophet, and the Hebrews. Not long after they have fled Egypt and they've crossed over the Red Sea, that tremendous kind of before and after moment for God's people. And now they're here in the desert on their journey to the Promised Land. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. And Moses replied, why are you quarreling with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? Then Moses cried out to the Lord, what am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me. The Lord answered Moses, go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile River, and go. And I'll stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Is the Lord among us or not? That's a question that's been asked for thousands of years. It's a question that some of us have probably asked ourselves as well. Maybe that's a question that you have here this morning. Is there a God out there at all? We have three characters in this story. We have Moses, we have the people of Israel, and we have their God. Now, in Moses' story, we know that he had killed an Egyptian slave boss when he thought that he was helping God out and defending God's people. But then he had to flee, and he spent years, decades, kind of as an outlaw in the desert. He got married, he raised a family, and then God shows up out of nowhere at a burning bush and starts talking to him. By the time the whole nation is out here in the desert looking for water, Moses has answered this question for himself. There is a God at work amongst us. My goodness, can't you see him all around you? But no, these people, they've been living in bountiful Egypt. Houses to live in, jobs, no tents, meat, vegetables, bread to eat every day, plenty of water. Yeah, okay, they were slaves, but still, it wasn't that bad, was it? And we prayed to gods that we could see, not this invisible God that you're telling us about, Moses. Do you see how they have been shaped and molded by the society around them, by the media, by social influencers, by the systems of the empire? They believed that they were better off as slaves of the system than liberated, but out here in the desert. And then Moses, the liberator, comes with stories of a God who wants to set them free. Sure, we'll go along with that, but what they really wanted was an empire that they could control themselves, not an invisible God in the wilderness. Yes, Pharaoh let us go after those miracles that Moses did, and yes, our children were spared when the angel of death passed over, and yes, we walked through the dry ground at the Red Sea, but now we're about to die of thirst. Is that God of yours, Moses? Is he among us or not? You see, these folk were new to the journey. Yes, they'd seen some miracles, but they hadn't learned to trust this God. This God who could break through any time he wanted. They were still looking for water in their mouth, not living water, not water that could sustain them through the struggles of life. And that brings us back to the woman at the well. She recognized that this man was a prophet of God. He spoke of things he could not have known. But she didn't know what to do with that. She was just used to explanations that she could manage. She's had a challenging life. We read through between the lines. Such a challenging life that she's probably asked many times, where's the Lord? Is the Lord among us or not? I think at this point in time, she was a woman who lived without hope. This moment when she met Jesus. And she couldn't see hope when he sat right there in front of her. Jesus admits to this woman that he is the Messiah. In John's Gospel, that's the only time Jesus reveals that truth to anyone. Other places he calls himself the bread of life, the living water, the Son of Man, other things, but never admitting that he actually is the Messiah to anyone except this Samaritan woman. And somewhere in this encounter, this woman's eyes are opened. She was a cynic. She was a skeptic. She'd had so many disappointments in life that not much fooled her anymore. This religion, that religion, I don't believe any of them anymore. But somehow God showed up for her. Is God among us or not? Well, this woman found an answer that day at the well. This is the end of the story. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I've ever done. That made such a powerful impact on this woman. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. She had met the living God sitting at a well in Samaria. He knew me inside and out, is the way she expressed it. And the people she told about this knew that something had happened to this cynical, skeptical neighbor lady. And they believed in Jesus because of what they saw and heard from her. This divorced, skeptical Samaritan lady was the first effective evangelist of the good news. That's a thought for those who have ears to hear. Israel was at a crisis point in the wilderness. Is God among us or not? Is there a living God out there? And then God showed up. If they had waited, would God have provided water without all the drama? In our times of crisis, what if instead of frustration and anger and grumbling, we waited on God to do what God was going to do anyway? The Samaritan woman kind of was a living crisis. She came to the well alone in the middle of the day, the hot sun, by herself, because she was gossiped about by the group of women who would come to the well in the cool of the morning together. She'd seen some rough times. Is there a living God out there? Does anyone care? Where do I worship him? Here or in Jerusalem? And with those questions in that life experience, God showed up. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Israel was at its most untrusting, most grouchy, most entitled moment. Why on earth would God choose to show up at that moment? That sketchy, cynical, grumpy Samaritan woman. Why would God choose to show up for her at that moment, in that place? It's the challenge. God is going to show up when we don't expect it. And it's quite likely we're going to be in a crisis when he does show up. When Jesus arrived in human form as an infant in a stable, Israel, the Jewish people, were in a crisis. They were under Roman oppression, Roman colonial powers. They had corrupt spiritual and political leaders, and they were wondering again, is there a God out there? They hadn't heard from God in 400 years. But at the most unexpected moment, at just the right time, Christ died for all those who could care less about him. Human logic cannot explain God's demonstration of love. A love that led him, almost required him to go to that cross and crucifixion. We have no words to explain this kind of love. But that's how God shows up. When is just the right time for God to show up? Paul says when we feel powerless, when we're weak, when we're lacking goodness, when we acknowledge that we're falling short of God's intentions, that's the unusual moment when God shows up. So I wonder this morning if you've had encounters like this with God, where the living God has shown up in your life and human logic can't explain it away. where we realize that I'm loved beyond worthiness, beyond comprehension. I'm loved in a way that can't be explained. I can say for myself, those moments of meeting God in that way have been more than just one. And if we read the record of the Old and the New Testaments, God keeps showing up many times when his people are weak. Yes, God gets frustrated, even angry, with our stupidity and our weakness, but he keeps showing up for us in love, his children. Is God still among us? Yes. So, in our moments of crisis, our moments of doubt, what if we were to patiently wait on him to show up, rather than take matters into our own hands, or to act out in anger and frustration like Israel did in the desert? For those of us, because of our experience with God over many years, who have a deep, abiding relationship with the Father, like Moses, we need to be careful not to get frustrated with those who are earlier in their spiritual journey, like Moses did. And when God shows up, like the woman at the well, are we the first ones to go out and declare his presence to our neighbors? Many of our neighbors are tired of religious talk, but they are thirsty. Do we have stale water for them, or do we have living water? That's our word for this week. I trust that as you live your life this week, that the presence of God will be real in your space. And so as we have encountered the living God through the love of the living Christ, we've been refreshed by living water. And so we go to live in the hope that this encounter inspires. We want to be water bearers to a dry and parched world, knowing that the God of love and hope goes before us, with us always. The Lord be with you, friends. Have a good week. Take care.